Maybe you have a new job or a promotion, but you still have a bit of imposter syndrome getting in your way. Now, it happens to all of us. So, how do you show up with confidence and learn to embrace your strengths? Hi, I'm Diana Bernal, a career strategist who guides ambitious Latinas so they can make major career moves. And today, I speak with Leena Mendoza. She's a business strategist and executive coach about how we can own our strengths and start to overcome imposter syndrome. We'll talk about confidence, your leadership style, and of course, the important role of communication and relationship building too. Let's jump in. Hi, Leena. Thank you for being here.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm excited to talk about how Latina professionals can show up with more confidence in the workplace, because I think of the 80s and 90s when most people, men, female, had to leave their race and ethnicity at home, right? And now we can show up as our authentic selves. Even at some places, it's still a challenge or some people have a tough time. But for the most part, more and more people are embracing showing up as their authentic selves. But you and I today want to take that a step further, that it's not just okay to show up authentically, but that you can embrace your cultural background as a real strength, as an advantage. So talk us through how women, how Latinas in particular, can start to own that strength.
Absolutely. So one of the things I hear often is Latinas share that they don't have leadership. So probably over 50% of the people that I interview who are Latinas, and they go, I'm not a leader. And so it's really about owning your gifts and your attributes, right? With skills, knowledge, talent. And so in our culture, right, we, take initiative, we get stuff done. We have the term eche con ganas, right? Get it. And so si se puede. And so It's like, how are we not leaders? Right. And so also the term buena gente. So that really leads to, and it's the Latino endorsement. So when I say, oh, here comes Diana, she's coming to the house, es buena gente. And so that's already the golden ticket. We're going to let you in. And so that speaks to your character. And so why I share that is that what were you already born with? Right. And so do you take initiative? Are you a project manager? Do you collect, right? Are you collecting people and coordinating? So you're already very community oriented in that way. Maybe you're the person who gets the party started, right? So that could be engagement. And then also, are you a planner? That's executive functioning. What do you already have that's really leading you in that direction?
Yeah. And I think women have started to embrace this place in the workforce over the last 10 or 12 years because we have empathy,
Yeah.
and we are community builders, and companies need community building, especially as more and more of your workforce is remote, right? And so that's where women, Latinas can come in with those strengths where they can become really great leaders, great managers in the workforce. But I imagine some of the women in particular that you work with still have a little bit of imposter syndrome, that they fear the thought that someone thinks they don't belong. Maybe they question whether or not they belong. So walk us through a little bit of working through imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. So we know that imposter syndrome is that fear of appearing fake, right? That people will figure you out. And so I believe that, and at least what I've heard so many times, is that there's this perception that corporate America is a certain way with a certain framework, and that you have to show up kind of like a boss level person with this confidence. And so it's not true, right? And so the organization they're not necessarily highly organized, and they drive that. They're really looking for you to drive that as a Latina who will get it done, who does have that compassion and empathy, and who has a sense of, understanding people and the business side. And so, I think also we want to lean into, like, when things are unknown, it's very normal to feel a little bit afraid, if not a lot. And then also just to feel like, it's unfamiliar territory. So I would be a little bit more concerned if you're like, I can do it, I'm amazing. But it's not something you're like, I can jump in the deep end and I don't have a life jacket. I'm like, no, don't do that. And so I'd be more concerned if you were hyper confident, right? And so it's normal when we tread new waters, for us to feel nervous, uncertain, and overwhelmed. And so learning how to talk about those feelings, but also own your gifts, like own those gifts that you have that is really going to drive your next project, your division, your organization. There's a reason why they selected you, and there's a reason why you positioned yourself for that opportunity.
And this can happen, I think, at any stage in our career. When you just mentioned about the person who's just jumping in, no questions asked. Sometimes I think about my younger self and how that was definitely me jumping in. But I feel like some young people that I meet still have a little bit of imposter syndrome, and we carry it with us in different ways. Just because we have a director title when we're 40 or we're the vice president, they can still have certain thoughts that kind of get in the way. So I wonder if part of it is just acknowledging that we have these concerns, these thoughts in our head, and just park them to the side, but still pushing us through them, right?
Absolutely. And also, you're creating a new pathway, right? So now you're the 40-year-old director. Maybe there wasn't, maybe you're the first. And so you're leading in that way. And just
Mhm.
also having that, I would say one of the tools I would recommend is having a squad or a trusted advisor that you can talk about these feelings and this experience so that they can help guide you. Right. And so, and they just kind of offload those feelings, also walk through that, process that. And then also what gives you energy and the positivity, because there are things you do know how to do. Right. And so honor that for yourself. And I think one of the most important things I tell people is, how can you expect someone to honor you when you don't honor yourself first?
That's so good. And what you said about that network, that circle of friends is so important. I just spoke about it actually last week in the concept of asking for help, especially when you are a leader and you have first been promoted. It is so critical to have the women around you. And in this case, if you've got other Latina women, other people of color around you that you can speak to because they've been there before. So if you don't have it in your workplace, maybe you find it elsewhere. Maybe it's someone that you went to college with. Maybe it's your sister's friend. Maybe it's someone in your space though. But really having someone to share the stories, I think makes us feel a little lighter and like, okay, it's not just me, right? I'm not the only one hearing or seeing these things.
Absolutely. One of the things that I think in general as Latinos and then also, young emerging leaders, right? So you're graduating high school, going to college potentially or a trade school, and there's a mentality in America that says, you're an adult, get it done, do it by yourself, right? So the independence is like really key. Like now I'm an adult, hashtag adulting. And so I really want to take it a step back and really share that it's not just about independence, it's about interdependent. Right. And so anytime I share that, I always do this. And so it's interconnection between each other, learning how to ask for help, support, and guidance. And the more you lean on each other, the farther you'll go. And so it's not just being how strong are you by yourself, but how strong are you with the squad.
Yes, and that squad is so important because we have to start making our way because no one's going to do it for us. I think about the Lean report from McKinsey this year, and we are in 2024, that showed that barely 1% of corner office jobs were held by Latinas. And I know that we make up well over 9% of the population. So it really is up to us. Now, is it fair that we might have to, work a little harder or think a little bit more about this? It is what it is. And what we need to do is support each other. And that's why I think these communities are so critical, and talking to other people, whether it is a coach or just someone else in your circle, that way you don't feel so alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then I think we just don't know how to pave our way in that way, right? So like, who do you trust? And so, it can be an ally. It doesn't have to necessarily be a Latina. Because, I want to give kudos to our allies too, who put their hand in and extend help. And then they also,
Yeah.
give guidance, right? And so, but we don't necessarily always talk about that. We talk about a specific, role model who was just like us, but some of us also have role models that didn't look anything like us, and they seen the gifts,
Hmm.
they seen that light in you, and they guided you. And so, but we don't know what that landscape looks like in corporate America. Who can we trust? It's not the same type of community per se, and like you would in your neighborhood, right? And so, who can you trust? Who's not going to backstab you in the office? Who's going to elevate you and amplify you in the most positive way? Understanding what those strategic partnerships look like. What does that even mean, right? And so we're saying the term squad, but it's really also who's your strategic partnerships. and then who provides productive partnership together with you. I also recommend stealthy relationships, which means, just having those quiet conversations with people that not everybody necessarily needs to know that you might be best friends with the mayor or the CEO. They can give you some great sage advice. And so, yes.
Yes, the allies are key. Actually, I should do a shout out to one of my managers who was key, white male, and he actually ended up building a very diverse workforce. His direct reports reflected that. So when you interview for a company or you're doing some networking, don't just look at the leadership, look at the layer below, because that shows you who is being promoted, that shows you who is being acknowledged. And you do have to have all types of people in your network that you can lean on for different times of your career. So I want to hear about you, Leena, though. Tell us a little bit more about how you got here.
I've been studying leadership since I was like 11 years old. And so there used to be something called the Pan American Games, anything that was, you know, involved with school or getting involved in the community, I was involved. And so I didn't know that solving problems was what I was doing, right? Or I would see something that was wrong. So sometimes other older adults would like, you always find things that are wrong. And I'm like, well, it's not that things that are wrong, right? It's the opportunity and what's the challenge that you can fill the gap. And so I didn't know how to say that till I became an adult, right? And so I was like, went through college and how do you articulate that? And so sometimes I would think there was something wrong with me because I would find what was wrong. But when I advanced into corporate America, what I found was where the pain points are is where the profit margins can expand. I turn pain points into profit margins. And so that has led me into being a trusted advisor to executive leaders, being able to, share like, here are some things that I see that are falling through the cracks. And it's typically people development. And it's typically also where are the holes in business optimization. And so when and a leader doesn't have a strong hold on both of those things, it can evolve rather quickly, especially when you're going through exponential growth. And so they don't know where to start, they don't know why it happened, and they don't know which direction to go. And so
Yeah.
I love leadership because it really has to do with just your true talents and gifts and driving that.
Right. And it's not just what you know, it's how you do it. I think that's so much of the success for any executive or any employee, really, but certainly at the leadership level. How are you lifting other people? How are you bringing them along in a whole new way? So, are there particular success stories that you have of some of the women that you've worked with who maybe had a tough time seeing themselves in that corporate space, in that corner office, or had a tough time sort of overcoming some of these challenges that were mostly in their mind, not the technical skills. They had the expertise, they had the experience, but they were just having a tough time getting out of their own way.
Absolutely. So I have a client I can specifically tell you about, and I have permission to do this. Is that she's navigating in the political arena, and so it's a very conservative area. And so, being a college graduate, not in the same field that they're looking at, also, we're kind of talked about masculine versus feminine leadership, and so it's not a term that she typically uses or myself, but it's understanding that it's not a bully environment, and it's not an environment. It's an environment where it is bullying, right? And so it's like, this is how we've always done it. Don't ask questions. And so she's coming in with a very inclusive thought process of how do you like it done, right? Extending compassion. That must be really hard for you. And so that's not the typical MO. That's not the typical DNA that they use. So she's using what is traditionally being, that has been laid out, as well as the ideas and thoughts and strategy that she comes up with. Her executive functioning is already established, but she strengthened it even more through coaching, the planning, the strategic partnership, and also the reframing for the negativity that came about and the conflict management. And so instead of going around it or like avoiding it, she went right to it, and she's been very successful.
Let's talk a little bit more about reframing. I think that's so important because we have all these thoughts that come through our head, but we also have opportunities. So to embrace those opportunities, sometimes we do have to reframe what is happening. So can you talk a little bit about what reframing really looks like?
Yeah. So sometimes, so reframing is really like, what is the perspective and that you're seeing that? So I always say lens, like, well, how are you seeing that? And when you see that,
Yeah.
right, it's like, is that the truth? And is that factual? And then like, can we pivot that or change it into something more positive and then also more on a higher level when it comes to leadership, right? So rather than I have a psychology degree, I'm not equipped to advance into politics. That really that because of the psychology degree, you know how to navigate, through people development, different personalities, and manage effectively when it comes to conflict management. And so what everything someone told you did not have is or you're not equipped is actually all the reasons why you are heavily equipped and prepared for what's ahead. And so it's changed that narrative to a more positive direction for yourself, but also owning your journey. And so reframing it. And then also when you're working with other people, you can help people reframe when they're saying something that it could be in direct conflict or not aligned with the initiative. And so helping them change their perspective so that it's in partnership with what's ahead.
So I think of the person that you were just talking about, how she's more inclusive, right? And maybe the people there are like surprised by this level of inclusivity that a new leader is bringing. So if we are bringing all these positive traits and some people sort of with the old school traits or with traits that aren't really helpful, if they are surprised by what is happening, how do we keep working with them so that they can open up their minds? And is it just a matter of continuing to model that behavior, even for our peers, not just the people who report to us, but the people aside and the people above?
I think it's important to validate people's, their concerns, their feelings, and their perspective of where they're at, no matter what level they're involved with, whether emerging leader or executive leader, and really start to build a bridge together, right? So how do we work together? That's where we were yesterday. What will that look like for tomorrow? And are we willing to try something new so that we can, evolve, right? And so I like the word evolve because it doesn't sound as scary as change management. And it's really just about
Yeah.
like, right? Because you're like, I don't want to change.
Yeah.
Don't come here and do something different. And so, but aren't we always doing something different, right? And so, right, evolving, you're probably not the same person as you were last year or 4 years ago. And so really looking at it is like, try something new. And then if you wouldn't like it, you can return back to that. And so really partnering with, I believe validating people where they're at, right? Like, hey, I can understand your concern. I understand this is traditional values and then really bridging that gap for what's ahead. And so it doesn't mean we have to disregard. I think that's not the way to go in communication or strategy, but it's really about really seeing, and I've been exercising that quite heavily this year is like, even if, especially because it's an election. So I'm like, even though I don't agree or understand, I'm going to try to understand
Yeah.
and listen more effectively.
Yes, listening is so key. And I think our choice of words can make a big difference too, because you use the word different. And I think that's helpful. Like maybe we want to try a different approach for this plan. We're not saying better. We're not saying your plan was worse or less effective. We're just saying different because that is really the term at play. And so sort of appealing to, like you said, meet them where they are and using a term like this is a different plan. Let's try something different can help building in those relationships. That way those other people don't feel as threatened because all people might feel a little threatened when a new person joins the team. I mean, there's always dynamics changing when new people come into a team, no matter who they are.
Mm. Absolutely. So I love that you said the dynamics, right? And so that's something I think as well, Latinas understanding, I can let me speak about myself. So I was a Latino who rolled my neck. Oh, let me tell you what's going to happen. And so I already know what to do. And everybody's going to love my idea. Well, I didn't know that
Yeah.
I should identify my partners, right? Who can I share this value and this perspective in a new way, kind of gain that allyship before going to the meeting and then really presenting in a very collective way and also getting feedback and then having those strategic alliances do matter for what's ahead. It's not just me bringing the idea in because people trust me. They're going to adopt it because people don't like shock factor, right? They like to be included in a concept. They like to give you some
Mhm.
feedback in their own thought process or, hey, I'd probably recommend it this way. And so understanding that the dynamics that play, the political landscape plays in an organization matters how you're going to navigate and navigate carefully. And so it doesn't mean you have to walk on eggshells, but it does mean you have to be aware.
Yeah. And I definitely think Latinas are good at inclusivity and we are born relationship builders, right?
Yeah.
And that is a skill that is such a strength, maybe to a fault, right? But, let's lean into that and make sure that we are building relationships. And then our managers can see that, other leaders can see that, how we can work across lines. I think talking about politics is actually a great example because we do all need to work together towards whatever that end goal is. And there is a really strong sense of relationship building that I think that Latinas can bring to it. So I want to touch on one other thing that you and I prepared for, or at least we talked about when we were sort of brainstorming this conversation. But you mentioned the phrase commanding the room. And I would so love you to speak to that because commanding the room is not speaking loudly and above everyone else and talking a lot. There's a whole nother set of attributes that go into commanding the room. So can you speak a little bit about how you coach your clients on commanding the room?
So it's making sure that people that you are walking in a room and with respect and honor before you arrive. And so when you walk in the room, it's not being about loud. It's not necessarily yelling. And so it's just you stepping in the room and everybody moves in that direction. You might be the quiet leader where the one sentence you say at the end, everybody moves and says, what is she going to say? And so, and sometimes that's often overlooked, right? To women in general, where they're like, oh, they're not confident. I coached a client through that because she was told she's not confident. Now she's running entire division. I'm like, it's not that you're not confident. It's that your executive presence is quiet. So it's really understanding who are you? And then what is your style of leadership and how do you command that room? When there is something in conflict, are you willing to ask the question where they know that it's, oh, we need to change our thought process based on what Diana said, right? And so you're like, is this the direction we want to go? And because of your executive presence, it'll snap them out of that thought process and get them to move going, oh, probably not. And so you're a thought leader, right? You are a strategic partner. And I keep saying the word strategic because you are valued for your intelligence and for the gifts that you bring to the table, whether it's how you move the room, what you get done, your executive presence and commanding the room. It's really about who you are inside. And so people honor that. And so either way, you can be quiet, you can be someone who speaks a little bit more or directly, but really having that commanding presence has a high level of respect and honor towards who you are as a leader.
So obviously, when you work with clients, you can help them figure out what their leadership style is. But if someone hasn't worked with a coach before or is listening to this type of conversation for the first time, can they reflect on their strengths and weaknesses and sort of see how they are as a leader? Or how can we guide them through this process in the very, very beginning?
So here's some questions I'd ask. Are you a person who thinks a lot? Are you a person who likes to be thoughtful about each person in the room? Are you a person who thinks quickly on their feet and can, really be able to coordinate exactly what's happening, what's next in the level of execution? You may be, also the next question could be, are you a big thinker? And are you also detail oriented? Right. And so we all bring different levels and values to the table, but it's really about how you bring that to the table. And so, start to reflect on what is it? How do you navigate? So those who are more quiet, more scared of them because they are very careful and they listen to everything and they're very detail oriented and they're very good at critical thinking. And so not that those who can present very quickly are not as good, but those that are more quiet, they come in and we're not ready for it. And so because of the corporate mindset of leaders speak up and speak often. And so that is not true. It's far from true. And we're overlooked if we're those who are introverts or quiet. And so those are some questions I would present is thinking about, do you like to think more deeply? Do you like to think about who will it impact? Do you take time to process? And so, or are you that forward thinker right on your feet and you can think big pictures and details, execute in 2 minutes? And so we just lead differently.
And as you reflect on your own styles, this is an opportunity also to observe your employees. I think what you mentioned, sort of that executive expectation. I think of Jack Welch, who many years ago set forth that expectation that successful executives had to be big and bold and the extrovert ideal. And then we have now seen that introverts have so much to offer and can be extremely successful. And there are plenty of CEOs who are also introverts. And I look at my own children, for instance. I have one who's an introvert and she is so observant. We will go somewhere or do something and she picks up on other things that none of us did. because the extroverts here, we were too busy gabbing or talking and touching things in the store and the whole bit. Now, extroverts, we have our strengths too, because of the way we bring people together for brainstorming and other things. But I think we are now at a place where we recognize the different strengths that these different types have. So as we are talking to leaders today to look at their own styles, we are also encouraging them. I hope that they will take the time to then pause and think about the people on their team and make sure that you give them that consideration as well, knowing that everyone on your team has different strengths and different areas for development. And you probably work a lot with your clients on how they work with their people, I would imagine as well.
Yes. Right. The communication, right. And being aware of how other people communicate. And then, so it's not just about like, are you introverted, extroverted, but what is your counterpart looking at, right? How do they navigate? Do they like shock factor? Do they like to be, kept abreast, so that they know things a week advance? Do they like detail? Do they not like detail? Are they delegators? So being aware of like what your skill sets are and how you navigate, but also how does your team. So you said the key word earlier is that understanding the dynamics, and then how people operate. And so the more you understand that ahead of time, I believe the further you'll get. It just takes time for us to understand that and some, stretching, right? So it's not something overnight.
Yeah.
I'm constantly learning about different dynamics and people. I look at patterns, when people do things, why people do things. And I look for the pattern. And so, I believe that people have immense amount of gifts, but they just haven't tapped in yet and they haven't been asked the questions. And lastly, they have not asked themselves those questions.
Oh, that is so spot on. Okay. So as we start to wrap up here, you also mentioned that it takes time, which is very, very true. So let's say someone is listening to this and they want to spend some time this weekend working on their confidence of showing up. What might be just one or two things that they can start to do to bring that confidence of who they are to the workplace?
Absolutely. One of the things I really believe in is learning how to affirm yourself. What did you do well? Like, I extended courage today. I had the conversation that really needed to be done in my workplace. What did you do? Maybe you just dressed up today. That's okay too, right? And so it was a tough day. I didn't cuss anybody out today. Like at some people, I'm like, well, do you know what happened today?
Not yet.
So, because there's some challenges. And so I feel it's affirming. And I think also it's taking that time to reflect. How did you do today? What could you have done better? Start to think. The more you start to think, the further you're going to go. As we're young in our career, we're doers, we're tasks. So I call it T to T, task to thought leadership. And the way you can advance the thought leadership is you start to think, you start to challenge things. So your parents might have always told you, do this way because, right? Especially if you're Latino, we're like, okay, and we don't argue. But as we navigate in corporate space and in the general landscape is, workplace, right? Is that you have to be a thought leader. And so it's affirming yourself and starting to reflect often.
Yes. And at night or sometimes in the morning, if I'm journaling, I do like to have my 5 acknowledgements. I acknowledge that I don't do them all the time, but if I'm having a tough time and I just sort of need to focus or take a few minutes, I will try to list out 5 things that I can acknowledge myself for. And yes, even just showing up and being at the table is acknowledgement of one thing. And then maybe it's something grander than that, but constantly reminding ourselves of a couple of things, small and large, that we did that helped us get to where we are today. I think that's terrific advice that can help us in all areas of our life, not just the workplace, right? So, Leena, I want to keep talking to you, but for the sake of moving us forward, where can people find you?
Absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn at Leena Mendoza, Instagram, Leena Mendoza, Facebook, and then also LeenaMendoza.com. And also I have a marketing consulting business. And so we're also at cobbletree.com.
Okay. All right. I'll put a link to the show notes, but thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see you real soon. Thank you for listening. For more, visit cornerofficelatinas.com, where we give you the framework, inspiration, and support you need to reach and thrive in the corner office. We have some free downloads on the website, where you can also sign up for our e-news, so we can keep you posted on workshops and events coming up that you will not want to miss. That's cornerofficelatinas.com. See you next week.